You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi again. Yes, it's me, Mighty Blue, my little old show, Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. And crisis is what we appear to be in right now. I'm writing this and recording it on Wednesday, March the 25th, and the whole world is gripped by the coronavirus pandemic. None of us know if the current predictions and prescriptions are correct yet. And I don't know about you, but it seems that the whole world is bracing itself for a very uncertain future. As you know, the various trail associations have suggested that everybody should get off whichever trail they're on, and that section and through hikes should be, at the very least, suspended. As you'd imagine, this has gone down like a cup of cold sick on Facebook and other social media platforms, yet I somehow feel that it's incumbent upon me, as somebody who's lucky enough to have a platform, to share my opinion with you. If you disagree with me, I will be delighted to have you on the show to share your views. In the interim, however, this week's guest is the marvellous Reverend Cari Pattison. Yes, another pastor on the show. Cari and I have been dancing around one another for weeks, and we were only recently able to arrange a recording session. Cari is a member of the class of 2019, as was I, and she will be along shortly. After that, in the interest of some balance, I have a short interview with a guy named Jason Woods. Jason started his attempted through hike a week ago on March the 18th. And his reflections are current and, in my view, still valuable. After Jason, I'll be telling you where I stand on this subject, and finally, we'll wrap up with Chapter 5 of Ben Montgomery's Grandma Gatewood's Walk. You'll also notice that I haven't mentioned Kate Stillwell, our woman of a certain age. Kate's flip-flop is on hold right now, though she reminded me that she does have a ticket for a flight up to Maine later in the year, so you never know. We may be hearing about Kate's journey later this year. For now, though, it's on hold. So it's another packed show, and we'll get on with it. Here is Cari Pattison, or Sprout. I'd like to introduce you all to a fellow member of mine of the class of 2019, even though we didn't meet. This is Cari Pattison. How are you, Cari?
I'm very well.
As she just takes a drink.
I'm very well, Steve. I'm drinking some orange spice tea.
Oh, impressive.
I think it looks like a beer, but it's not.
No, it does look like a beer. Yeah, very good. And I reached out to you after I read an article that you'd written in the Trek. And in it, you wrote that in leaving my job, apartment, town, and community, I wanted to change not only in my life, but in myself. And you also wrote, funny enough, in another thing I read, I've been cyber stalking you a bit recently. This through hike is the bridge between what came before and what comes next. And I don't know yet what that will be. What were you looking to change in your life, and what were you looking to find?
I love that question. I think most elementally and literally, I was looking to spend a whole lot of time outdoors.
Right.
I mean, that was one obvious change, but not just for the 6-month through hike, for the foreseeable future. Like my dream would be to spend at least half of my life, including my work, including my social life, including my reflective time, with the trees and the river. And right now, if you could see out my window, the Hudson River is about 50 feet away.
I used to live on the Hudson River in New York City, in Battery Park City. I was literally on the river on my balcony. I overlooked the Hudson, so we were looking at the same water.
So you know what it's like. Yeah, so I'm about 2 hours north of there.
Yeah.
And so yeah, in the most concrete sense, I wanted to spend time with the elements, with the weather, with the dirt, with the trees, with the birds. But in terms of making a change in my life, I had been at the same job for 12 years and loved it very much.
Sure.
Loved serving the church in Westchester County, New York. And I was really ready to, I guess the biggest change I was looking to make was to say, okay, I know I'm ready for something different. I don't yet know what that next move is career-wise or relationship-wise or exactly what season of life I'm heading into, but I knew I needed to create a very intentional pause in between that and the next thing. And what I was hoping to find, not so much answers, but I was looking to find space and time so that I could grieve and heal and discover and have a new experience of community. And I wasn't sure what I would find, but I had a gut feeling that it would be good.
Did it seem important to you to completely upend your life? You couldn't just find one or two of these things because you literally moved out of town, moved out your apartment and everything. Was there something within you that felt that this was a transitional period in your life?
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. It's kind of like the upending my life. I mean, basically, when I left my job, I wouldn't have had any money or reason to keep my apartment. So it wasn't so much that I wanted to make this big dramatic statement.
Mm-hmm.
It was just that one thing required the other thing, and required the other thing. Yeah. You know, I'm not independently wealthy, so I couldn't continue to pay for an apartment. I had no interest in subletting the apartment because when I finished the thru hike, I wasn't coming back to the same job.
Right.
So I knew I was really restless and ripe to do something new professionally and personally. So taking a little section hike for 2 weeks in the woods, that wouldn't have cut it.
No. Yeah. So where were you working at the time this happened then?
I was working at the Reformed Church of Bronxville, which is a beautiful Protestant church about 20 minutes north of New York City. And most of our congregation are commuters into Manhattan. So I was serving there. Most of that period, I was an associate pastor. So kind of like the number 2 person on the team.
I do seem to have interviewed quite a few pastors. And the reason why I find it's interesting is I don't actually know how to say the word properly. It's not the Italian dish, it's pastor. And I can't say how Americans say it. So how do you say pastor? Pastor?
Oh, pastor. It's the same as minister, same as reverend.
Okay, that's much easier for me. Yeah, reverend's much easier for me. I'm more used to it. Yeah,
it's all the same.
So this outdoor stuff, where did that come from? Were you actually a hiker, or did you just like being in the outdoors, not necessarily hiking?
Both. I was definitely a hiker, although nothing nearly as intense as a thru hike. My appetite for the outdoors was really awakened as a child. My dad would take us on bike rides and take us on hikes in Colorado. I grew up in Kansas, and I think when you come from Kansas, the whole rest of the country seems like a magical wonderland because
we're not in Kansas anymore. Yeah, hence the expression.
Right, and when you're in Kansas, it's like pretty landlocked. It's very flat. You know, no mountains, not much water. No real landscapes that are unusual other than the sky. You always watch the sky when you're from the Great Plains. So as I got older and moved further toward the Northeast, I just found the landscape out here enchanting. And I intentionally, did seek out opportunities to hike with friends and groups. And I would say too, the connection between my ministry work and my thru hike isn't so disconnected as you might think. It was actually my youth leaders in junior high school when I was 14 who took us on a church youth group trip up to Minnesota boundary waters on the border of Canada.
Right.
And for me, faith in God was always synonymous with this adventure, exploring creation, exploring the earth, and living simply and going into the woods. And we also went into other environments like the inner city and soup kitchens and homeless shelters. But it was always to me linked with my experience of God.
So a lot of this thing about living outside was to reflect your relationship with God, was it?
Partly, yeah. I mean, we some of my Christian friends and I have sort of jokingly but seriously called this a pilgrimage. And when you think about the pilgrims on the Camino de Santiago or Canterbury Tales, you think of people who are seeking something that they're moving toward, but also having this profound experience of God and one another as they hike.
Interesting.
And as they walk. So
tell me then about meeting Mary Stewart and how you came to want to hike the trail, because it seems to me that she was integral in that journey.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm 100% serious when I say there's no way I would have been on the trail except for her. She was a woman, I met her when she was almost 60, and she was coming down the stairs of Bear Mountain, those steps, on the AT.
I remember them well.
And I was just out for a light day hike. And 3 times that day I passed her. I passed her on the way up. And then I ended up coming back to the lodge to get something I forgot. And then I came back. I saw her again. She warned me to watch out for rattlesnakes. And then when I finished my hike, and I actually got really lost that day, I came back and she was still there because she was doing a Nero that day and meeting up with some friends. And so total, we spent maybe 1 hour talking together, but it very much felt like one of those divine appointments or cosmic encounters. Yeah. So she was the first person I'd met who was a female, older than me, and doing a through hike by herself. Although, as you and I both know, Steve, there's no such thing as by yourself.
Absolutely,
so,
there's not,
Yeah. So I thought if she can do it, I can do it. And I told her that day, hey, I have some life goals I'm working on. And if those things don't work out, I'm hiking the trail next year. And she was so dear. And she said, well, I hope all those things work out, but let's stay in touch on Facebook. And if you decide to hike the trail, reach out to me right away. And I did.
So you decided to hike the trail, you reached out to her, and didn't she hike with you the first couple of days or something?
It was incredible. I reached out to her hoping at the very most for a 15-minute conversation about gear and about just trail tips. And when I had that conversation with her in late December of 2018, she called me the very next day and she said, well, I've been thinking about this, and how about I drive from Charleston, South Carolina to Atlanta, Georgia? I'll pick you up at the airport, drive you to Springer Mountain, and hike your first stretch with you. And at that point, we thought it would be a couple of days. It ended up being just, the first day, but it was a tremendous, tremendous gift. And for me, it was like the green light from the universe or God or whatever you want to call it, saying okay, let's do this.
So you got there and you headed out. Were you intimidated by it to start with, or because
Totally.
I think when you look at the trail when you're 2,200 miles from the end, and you try to bite it off in just 8 miles first day or whatever the number is, 7 or 8 miles first day. Did you think this was something you could do? Did you feel you had the mental fortitude to be able to do it, or was it just something you see how far we go?
I was pretty sure, Steve, from the beginning that I had the mental fortitude, or that I could at least conjure it up from the people around me. I mean, one thing ministers are really good at is sort of drawing inspirations from a lot of sources. And so I knew that as long as I had people around me and a telephone to call people I love, I felt pretty confident in the mental part, but I definitely felt intimidated by the physical part. I'm not an athlete. I never played a varsity sport. For a brief season in my life, I was a very modest runner. I would do some 5Ks and 10Ks.
Sure.
I did 1 half marathon. I am a fitness instructor is one of my jobs. But when I say fitness instructor, I mean, I'm teaching mostly middle-aged and up. The idea of being on this trail with a lot of people in their 20s and knowing we were going to be coming up against weather and we were going to come up against this timeline to get to Katahdin, and I knew that at 42 years old, I wasn't unbreakable, which turned out to be sadly.
We'll come to that. Yes.
We'll come to that.
Yeah. But wait till you're 67 then, girl. Let me tell you, I'm 67. I certainly wasn't unbreakable.
Yeah. And I mean, I knew that I wasn't like the bionic woman. So I felt more intimidated physically than I did mentally or spiritually.
Right. And you already mentioned that you're an ordained Presbyterian minister, and you actually referred to yourself, which made me laugh when we spoke before, as an itinerant preacher. What does that mean?
Yeah.
What does that mean to you? Are you kind of a guest preacher or something?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's because I left my permanent church job, and so now I'm kind of like a minister at large. And until the coronavirus hit, I was going to different churches almost every Sunday.
That's right.
And preaching to them. And then, they pay you for that one time. And then maybe you come back another time. And so it's a nice way to keep yourself in it until you get that next long-term job.
And did you think that the AT would actually enhance your relationship with God, or was that unrelated to God as far as you were concerned? Did you just want the hike?
No, I mean, to me, it's like, you might expect hearing this from a minister, but to me, like, God is a part of everything,
Okay.
right? God is a part of like me getting up and making oatmeal this morning. Like God is just sort of in the air that we breathe. And so for me, like, I for sure hoped. In fact, Mary Stewart was the person who told me that if you haven't been praying much, don't worry. When you get on the Appalachian Trail, you will pray. And I definitely found that there was, I don't know that I would call it like a revival in my faith, but I would definitely say there were moments where like God and I had it out, like I had time on the trail. I had space on the trail.
Yeah.
I could scream. I could swear. I could weep over things. I could laugh. I could invent stories. I could talk to God. And then that night be right back with my trail family laughing while we're making our meal, So
Yeah.
I felt like it wasn't necessarily this rose colored, like me and God on this beautiful path for 2,000 miles. But I would say it was more like my understanding of the Old Testament Hebrew prophets, where they like shouted at God, like, God, what are you putting me through? And
Yeah.
I felt like I needed that. I had lived in a very tight knit Wall Street hamlet community in Westchester. And even if I had screamed, in my apartment, people would have heard me. Like everything was so stacked
Sure.
on top of each other. And I needed just like a big, wide, long trail to like have it out. And I feel like that wasn't the dominant experience of my hike, but that definitely got to happen.
You people who, that sounds terribly patronizing, I didn't mean to be, people who have that belief and have that faith in God, it must be wonderful for you to believe he's always there for you. I did, and people know on this show, I'm not religious, but I did try talking to him for the first 800 miles.
Wow.
And he never spoke back to me, not once. So I'm not going to argue about whether he should or shouldn't have done.
No.
But I try to have conversation literally every single morning with him. And so
Wow.
I do envy those of you who have that faith and believe that he's with you all the time, which I think must be a wonderful, wonderful thing. And so you go on the trail and you were looking for something. You were.
By the way, 800 miles of praying every morning. You did way better than I did, Steve. I forget about God for like weeks at a
time. By praying, I'd stand on the trail, I'd put my poles together, and I'd bow my head and ask him to look after certain people in my life. And that was it. But and you know what? That was cathartic for me. And I'm kind of wondering, actually, this kind of leads on to what I was going to say next.
Yeah.
You spoke about a series of losses and private, personal breakup, personal challenges. What would you have done had the trail not been so cathartic? Would you feel you would have needed something additional to that? Or did you find the trail sufficiently cathartic to allow you to move on, whatever that bridge was going to be? Does that make sense?
I mean, I think that's a hard question to ask. I'm a believer, Steve, that the deepest losses in our lives, we don't actually get over.
Sure.
But as one author that I listened to on an audiobook on the trail, Barbara Kingsolver, one of her characters in the book, Prodigal, I think it's called Prodigal Summer, one of the characters says, you don't necessarily ever get over the loss, but you learn to love the space that the person left behind.
Nice.
And I think for me, the trail gave me space and time to love what those losses left behind. And I mean that in a really real sense, because in one of my blogs, I wrote about the fact that if any of those losses hadn't happened, I would not have been on the Appalachian Trail in 2019.
That's right.
I might have gone someday. I might have done a section hike, but what those losses opened up for me is very real. And I learned to kind of love the space also that those losses carved out inside of me. I think they carved out a space to be more compassionate, to be a better listener to other people on the trail, and to connect with them with their losses and hear their stories. So I don't know if I would use the phrase sufficiently cathartic. Like, I think the trail was many things for me. And I think I actually probably overestimated how much time on the trail I would need to like cry and grieve. That did happen at points, but I mean, half that grief was just hunger and tiredness and foot pain, right? Like the usual hiker stuff.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
So I don't know. I would say what the trail did, I think, is it gave me just an incredible gift. And that's why I say that even though I wasn't able to finish all 2,200 miles of it, I wouldn't trade last year for anything.
Yeah.
I feel like it did so much more than give me catharsis. I felt like it gave me, just incredible new friends and a stronger sense of my own capacity and power. And I think it gave me just a really deep appreciation for the beauty of this country, or for that whole southeast
I totally agree
mid-Atlantic.
with that. Yeah, that was a
Yeah,
kind of a shock to me. I mean, who knew that New Jersey was so nice? I mean, having
yeah,
only
and
ever
like
been, I'd
northern
only ever been to
Georgia.
Newark before. I mean, really, no.
Yeah, like there's just so much beauty, and I think that for anyone who would be listening to this who's going through a loss and thinks like, oh, do you just go on a long hike and get over your grief? That wasn't my experience, and that wasn't the experience of the people I hiked with. But what I do think it did, it like expanded our ability to carry within us both the sadness and this incredible joy, and to say it's okay for these to just coexist,
Yeah.
like right foot, left foot, joy, sorrow, right foot, left foot.
I can imagine, actually. I'm only, and I've never heard you preach, but having read some of your writing, where you make some really interesting quotes, and some that really made me laugh out loud. Some quotes that you made, I'd imagine you preach in much the same way, because it gives a story from the quote being so apposite. You come up with a story out of each quote, which I thought was great. So I'd imagine you preach that way. I'm not asking the question. I'm just saying that's what I imagine.
Thank
And I
you.
also learned that you had a lot of great adventures on the trail, including this 5-inch spider who camped out in your shoe in the Shenandoahs. You need to tell us about that.
I will. I was aqua blazing, which, as you know, is to either kayak or canoe through part or all of the Shenandoahs
Sure.
along the river. And my friends McGruber and Morningstar were with me. And we, when you aqua blaze for several days, the places that you camp overnight are like these little islands that are kind of right in the middle of the river, or like
Oh, lovely. How nice.
these little embankments,
Right. Yeah.
actually,
Yeah.
alongside the river. And we were so proud of ourselves this one night for finding a perfect little camping spot that wasn't too slanted. And we got there and it was already almost dark, but we get up the next morning and we're like, oh yeah, this was so lovely. And I start to put on my Ultra. No, at that point I had a Saucony trail runner. And as I start to put my foot in the shoe, I kid you not, this spider that's like epic proportions, like bigger than the whole palm of my
Oh
hand,
my
just like
gosh.
starts to crawl out of my shoe. And pretty soon we looked around us and we realized the entire embankment was infested
Oh my
with
gosh.
these like tarantula-sized spiders. And it was, we just screamed.
I'm
We
not,
just
I'm not,
screamed and
I
we
got to
got
tell
out
you,
of there.
I'm not great with them. I tell you, I don't like spiders at all.
Yeah, and I don't think most AT hikers would have experienced it unless you aqua blaze.
Oh dear, I'm glad I didn't in that case then. Now, I've asked this question before about spiritual or religious people. How did you fit personally into that, I guess, somewhat liberal, looser lifestyle? How was that for you, relating to other people on the trail, because smoking dope and things like that?
Oh, yeah. Well, I've lived in and around New York City for most of my adult life. So there's like not too much that can shock me. And I
No,
certainly
sorry,
don't.
no, hang on. Don't get me wrong.
Oh,
I didn't think it would shock you for a minute, because you're an adult and you know that sort of thing goes on, but you were living amongst it so much. Was that okay? Did
yeah.
you find that fine?
I have to say, Steve, I mean, even when I was a pastor of a church, so many of my friends were not religious, were not church people. So that in and of itself didn't seem like strange, to be around a lot of people who were like not living a so-called churchy life. But in terms of just, to me, like the cigarettes and the weed and the vaping and the beers, like it all just kind of like, it went with the lifestyle of we're all in the woods here doing the best we can.
Sure, sure.
And whether you're going to have the extra Snicker bar or the joint or the vape or whatever, it's like we're just all supporting each other. So I mean, I have to say it was like a little startling when I realized how many people were doing psychedelic mushrooms and like acid, like the psychedelics and acid thing was like, I haven't had as much exposure to that. And I was kind of, I mean, it was a little surprising how some people act when they're tripping, but no one ever did anything that I thought
And
like,
hilarious, and normally hilarious as well.
yeah, like kind of like sometimes like I just wanted to take care of them like a mom, because sometimes they just seem like lost boys. But I would say for the most part, it just felt like, hey, we were all, doing what we could to keep ourselves sane and have fun and uh, kind of ride the tide of the changing weather. And that I would say it really didn't affect me.
Right.
In fact, I would say one thing that was really freeing about the trail community, including those different ways people unwind and relax, is that you felt like very quickly you could be yourself with people. That was my experience, because especially living around the New York City metro for all those years and being in a pastoral leadership role,
Sure.
like I was used to wearing high heels and wearing makeup every day and wearing business suits and like being very professional. And so it was quite refreshing to be in a place where we all smell and we're all dirty and we're all wearing the same hiker uniform. And it's like very, very equalizing. So I felt much more in common with the people around me in that atmosphere, actually,
That's
than I did.
interesting, because that was my next question, actually, how
Yeah.
you adapted to that somewhat feral lifestyle, let's say.
Yes, I
It
love that
really
word,
is,
Carol, so
but
much.
isn't it though? And what shocked me was how little I cared that I didn't shower. It just
Yeah.
didn't matter to me at all, and that was a bit of a shock to me, because I shower once, sometimes twice in a day over now. But if I went 3 or 4 days without a shower on the trail, I couldn't care less.
Right. I mean, I'm not going to lie. Like there were times where I could smell my own smell and I was like, oh, or like, I really wished I could exfoliate my face. My skin really suffered. So I won't pretend that I never like lamented the lack of that stuff, but I would say it was small potatoes compared to some of the other challenges.
Of course, yeah,
And
of course.
yeah.
But you didn't make it to the end anyway, as you referred to earlier on. Tell us about the injury that took. Oh, people should have seen you then. By the way, I wish I was recording video right now. When I said you didn't make it to the end, she just put a hand to her face. So she
I
done
was
it again.
more like I was doing like a prayer.
Oh, right, okay, it could be. Yeah, it's praying halfway through. So
Oh.
tell us about the injury that took you off track. You're about 1,300 miles in, something like that, in New Jersey.
Yeah, it was the mile marker 1308.4, but who's
Yeah,
counting?
not that you remember. Yeah.
I mean, I may or may not have the exact screenshot on
Oh
that hook
gosh.
of where
Oh,
it
no.
was. Yeah, it was just this lovely July day, July 22nd on a Monday. And I was hiking with my friend Django that day, and we'd had a lovely time at the Mohican Outdoor Center. I'm sure you
Awesome.
walked through there and had some good food. And we had camped out outside of in the campground of the Mohican Center. And we'd had just a really great morning. We climbed up Catfish Fire Tower. We'd taken a bunch of pictures of like wildflowers and blueberries. And it just felt kind of like the world was alive with this midsummer glow. And that gave way to a thunderstorm, which we knew was coming.
Mhm.
But I mean, hikers hike. That's what
Oh,
we do,
all right.
rain
Yeah.
or shine. And
Yeah.
so unless it's like an ice storm or a tornado or something, we're just going to keep going. And we had miles, that we had goals we wanted to make that day. And it was, I want to say around 2 or 3 in the afternoon. And I realized like how slippery everything was getting.
Mhm.
But I had my trekking poles. My pack was the lightest it had ever been. It was down to, including my food and water. I had waited at Mohican Outdoor Center, I think, or a few days prior, and it was down to 18
Oh
pounds,
my
which I was really
gosh. Well
proud. Yeah,
done. Yeah.
with my provisions.
Wow.
So I felt really confident and I felt strong, and I hadn't had any injuries or illness out on the trail really, other than poison ivy. And so we're walking along this kind of slanted section of rock. So it wasn't like little rocks on the path. It was
Mhm.
like we're kind of walking along
Yeah.
a mountain face.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
And I know no one on this podcast can see my hand gestures
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
now.
I'm watching, but yeah, I'm glad you realized this is just audio.
But yeah, I just want everyone out there who's listening to know it wasn't like a little rock I tripped on. It was like the side of a rock face.
Yeah.
And it was probably slanted at like 45 degrees in my memory.
Yeah.
And the AT marker, the blazes go right along the top of it. So
Yeah.
what happened is as I'm walking along the blazes with my trekking poles, fully concentrating, I didn't have earbuds in, I wasn't on the phone, and I just slipped down that mountain. And as I slipped, I could feel and hear some kind of a crack.
Ooh.
And then I slid down about 6 feet to a little ledge. And that was the beginning of the end.
So how do you get off then? You actually broke your ankle then. How far were you from an exit?
Yeah, I was several miles from the nearest parking lot or anything.
Oh,
so
gosh.
we called 911, and because it was pouring rain, we set up our shelters so I could at least be a little bit dry while I elevated my leg. And about 2 hours later, there was the search and rescue team.
Oh, they came and got you off the
ATVs.
mountain.
Oh my gosh. I'll send you the blog post. Yeah, there was
Oh.
ATVs, firefighters, ambulance, EMTs. And the hilarious part is that the EMS workers, one of them was the same woman who runs Mohican Outdoor Center. So they lower me off the stretcher off the ATV, and they lower me into the ambulance, and there's Misty going, "Hey, Sprout, what'd you do?" And it was so funny because there were all these emergency vehicles, like extra fire engines and ambulances and police cars. And I looked at the park ranger who was with us, and I said, "Oh my gosh, was there a natural disaster? Like, was there a forest fire? Like, what's happening?" And he looked at me and he said, "These are all for you." And I was like, I'm pretty sure that when my friend and I called 911, we mentioned that there was one female with an injured leg.
How did that feel? You must have known then and there it was over. That must have been kind of devastating for you because you come so far as well.
I mean, you'll laugh at this since you're not a religious person. We ministers are very good at wishful thinking, right? Like whether we have doubts about something or not, we still want to wish for the best.
Yeah, sure.
And so even when I was riding in the ambulance for over an hour to the nearest hospital, I kept wanting to believe it was just a sprain.
Oh, hope against expectation. Excellent.
Yeah, and even the EMS workers actually said, we can't tell for sure if there's a break or not. So maybe you'll just get off the trail for a few weeks and then you'll resume, or maybe you can do a flip-flop. And I was holding on to that hope until the moment at Newton Memorial Hospital when the radiologist came back with the x-ray, gave it to the doctor, and the doctor said, "Your hike is over."
Oh.
That's the moment where the tears unleashed, all my optimism flew out the window, and I kind of just let it sink in.
Yeah, that's terrible because I know you wanted to go back this year as well, didn't you? And with this, where we are right now, we're recording this, and I have to say the date these days because it's to be current all the time is almost impossible. Now, today's date we're recording is the Thursday the 19th. This is going to go out on Thursday the 26th next week. So this information may be out of date, but we're going through this coronavirus thing, and the ATC are advising people not to do hikes. You were planning to go out, weren't you, later in the year?
Not only was I planning to go back out next year, the entire past 9 months have all been every single thing I've done and
You mean this
year?
You mean this year?
For these past 9 months.
Yeah, sorry.
So everything that I've done for the last year has been pointing toward getting me back to the trail.
Oh, Cari. Oh, dear.
So I didn't apply for new ministry jobs. I didn't go find a new place to live. Like everything has been in service of getting me ready for the trail. I've been physically training. I've been refining my gear. I've been working in an outdoor outfitter. I've been planning. And so the deal is like, well, if there's one thing that the Appalachian Trail taught me, including my injury on the trail, it's to expect the unexpected. It's to live like the next 10 miles and then the next 20 miles and then the next day. And so I feel like in an odd way, I feel very poised to handle whatever's coming with the corona, which none of us knows how bad it's going to get. And we could all be living a much different version of our lives than we were a week ago or a month ago. And I may be called upon to be a chaplain in a hospital or to be helping emergency workers or, living out of my tent again. I'm very serious. I don't know. But I do know that I know how to eat dehydrated food really well.
So that's interesting.
And I know how to stay hopeful. And so I'm hoping and praying that everything that the trail fortified in me can now be used in service, not only to keep myself sane, because I'm super bummed my trail is canceled, but to help people in the world.
Well, you know what? The way you were saying that, I was thinking that you probably would have had some of that because of your faith. But you're saying that the things you learned from actually hiking last year was
Yeah.
what gave you. Isn't that interesting that it was
Yeah.
that your thought now is informed by what happened in your hike last year? Obviously, your faith is still ever present, I'm sure. But
Yeah.
it's interesting that the AT gave you those skills to take it on this way.
For sure. Both the hiking and the injury, because both of those things together taught me, like, you're just going to have to make do, kiddo. Like,
Yes.
you know what I mean? Like, you're going to have to make the best out of this. And whatever situation you're in, whether you did a beautiful day of 20 miles, whether you slipped on a mountain and found yourself in the emergency room, everything in life is about adapting. And I think if there's one thing that the AT teaches you, or any through hike, it's that you can get by with way less than you think you can.
Oh, totally.
And you can get through way harder situations than you think you can.
Yeah.
And so even after the trail, I've pieced together this life where until coronavirus hit, I had 6 part-time jobs. I'm living in a monastery of all places, and life is like nothing like it was a year and a half ago for me.
Mm.
But I feel like, okay, the coronavirus is super scary and it's real, and I'm not sugarcoating it. But I also feel like people who've come through a through hike, I think we have something unique to offer in the middle of all of this.
Interesting. I think you're right as well, actually. I just to end up now, I'm going to go back to the original post of yours that I read.
Sure.
And it was all about the impact of the trail on your fellow hikers. Yet you didn't have any conclusions of your own at the time. You said you would say them later. You wrote, "We breathed in loads of fresh air, and now we're moving into a world with a little more compassion, confidence, and patience." Did that apply to you, or are you still trying to work out what happened to you?
Oh, that's a great question. I think I've delayed writing that personal blog post.
I know you have, because I've been looking for it.
I have boatloads of notes, Steve, on my iPhone of like all the things that the through hike has changed in me, and I don't even know how to condense it and edit it. I do think what I said on behalf of the hikers who were interviewed for that article, what did I say? Compassion?
You said we breathed in loads of fresh air, and now we're
Yeah.
moving into the world with a little more compassion, confidence, and patience.
Yeah, because those were 3 things that came up a lot in the people I interviewed. And I would for sure say compassion, confidence, and patience most of the time have increased in me. But I think the through hike, man, I think it just gave me such a savoring of being alive. Like coming back to the real fundamentals of waking up in the morning and seeing your breath on a cold day and making your coffee and saying hi to the people around you.
Sure.
And on your worst moments, when you get to the shelter and it's all full and everybody's rain soaked, can you do that one thing to make somebody else's day better? Can you go get water for someone? Can you make a cup of tea for someone? I feel like the through hike, how it changed me is to really say, okay, I don't know if I'm going to live till I'm 95 or 45. And this is a tremendous gift that we've been given to be here. And I think I'm a lot more able to take my weaknesses in stride. I mean, one thing I would joke about on the trail is that, especially at the beginning, I was bad at everything. Like, I didn't know how to pitch my tent right. I didn't know how to like strip down my pack right and like assemble it again. I barely knew how to boil water in my stove. I mean, I had taken some REI classes and I had tested all my gear on a test weekend, and I was like a basically healthy human. But I also felt like I sucked at a lot of things.
We all did.
And I think it just like, it freed me up to laugh at that and to be like, it is so joyous in your when you're 40s, in midlife, to not have to be an expert and to be a beginner again. And so I think one way the trail has changed me is to not be afraid of taking risks because I don't think I'm going to be good at them. Whether that's professional, whether that's relational, whether that's something creative and entrepreneurial. Yeah, just to say, okay, if I'm not good at this yet, I bet there's somebody else around me who is and who's willing to teach me.
And they're also willing to help, aren't they?
Yeah. And I also think too, I guess I'll say one more thing. I had the privilege to lead with a friend of mine from the trail, a hiking retreat back in the fall for a group of adults.
Nice,
And
nice.
we would sleep in the monastery at night and have our meals here and then hike all day during the day. And one of the brothers was the main leader, one of the monks. It was amazing how just in 3 days, the adults who came on that trip who did not know each other, the ways they shared, the ways they opened up, the ways they connected,
Sure.
the way that like you don't have to force nature to do something. The act of hiking and walking through the mountains, through the woods, stopping to look at a view, like that does a healing work all of its own. And I feel really strongly called in whatever my next ministry looks like to invite more people into that. It's not a medication. It's not a 6-month program. It's
Mm.
not a master's degree. It's as simple as the elements of community and walking and being out in the woods together. And I think it does something magic for people.
I could not agree more. And in fact, I hope you do get back on. You probably won't get back on this year, but maybe you will. But if you do, I presume you'll go next year, will you? If you can't go this year to get it done.
I'll go as soon as I can, but
Yeah.
truthfully, Steve, I don't know financially how I could put my career on hold for another year. So
Gosh.
I may not have, I still have 1,000 miles to go. So
Right, yeah.
I need to have like 2 to 3 months off to do it. And I don't know when I'll be able to do that again, but
Okay.
hey, you never know. I'm really,
You can cope
I'm
with it.
hopeful.
You can cope with it now, can't you? So it's okay.
Yeah. You know what? I feel like maybe in the end, it's not all about finishing it.
Mm.
I mean, I still feel like I got a little bit cheated out of New England, though.
Oh, you definitely did. Yeah, you definitely did.
I mean, now looking back, I kind of wish I did a southbound hike just
Yes.
so I could have gotten to Maine.
Yeah. Oh well.
I'd get to Maine.
Well, look, I'm so glad that you came on the show. We took a while to sort this out, and I really loved reading your blog posts. I don't know whether do you share your blog posts or not?
Yeah, they're
Right.
public.
Okay. In that
Yeah.
case, I'll put a link up to your post because I
Thank
think
you.
they were really interesting. And I think you're a really smart writer. But I really appreciate you coming on. And if you do go back, let me know, and I'll tell people that you've gone back, and it'd be nice. All right.
Thanks. Hey, it's so fun talking to you, Steve.
And you. Bye.
Bye.
What a calm presence Cari is. Her faith and a hiking experience from last year allow her to accept that her dream of a thru hike may very well be over, at least for the foreseeable future. Funnily enough, while we never planned it this way, hearing Cari this week may very well help others deal with the fact that their dream of 2020 may also be over. None of this is easy for anybody, and now we're going to hear from somebody who set out from Springer just a week ago. This is Jason Woods.
Hello, it's Jason.
Hey, Jason, Steve Adams, Mighty Blue.
Hey, Steve. How are you?
I'm well, thanks, and thanks for calling. So you're on the trail. You've been on there since Sunday. How is it?
I've been on since Tuesday the 18th.
Sorry,
I think was the first day I got on.
Sorry, I shouldn't have said Sunday because actually you messaged me Sunday. That was what it was. Yeah, as I was just
I came
just
off
looking.
the trail and I saw your post.
So tell us then. So we are actually recording now, just so you know. So tell us where you are. I mean, firstly, you got on the 18th. Now we're talking now on Wednesday. I think it's moving so fast, isn't it? We're now talking on Wednesday I don't even know what day it is. Wednesday the 25th. So you've been on the trail for a week. Things have changed a heck of a lot, haven't they? So what are you seeing?
We've seen well, I mean, I haven't been out here before, so I don't know what to expect. From the people we've met along the way that are locals, they've told me that it's a lot less crowded than previous years. I've seen some shelters that haven't been full, mostly haven't been full. I've seen sites that, there might be 10 tents pitched around a shelter area.
Right.
Stealth sites that I've heard before you couldn't fit a tent at that have 2 people. So it definitely seems to be taking a big impact with the pandemic on the number of people who are out.
So let me ask you then, you went out, say, a week ago, and the world did look very different then. And I don't know how much you're keeping up to date with the news, but the ATC, and must have been around the time you went out. The ATC put out this.
It was like the day after I started.
And you're through. By the way, you are through hiking or are you section hiking?
Well, I'm through hiking if I can. We'll see what happens.
Right. So, well, but the AT have said you shouldn't be out here, and I know a lot of people disagree with that. But at the end of the day, the AT are the ones who have the responsibility of care for the trail, because obviously they talk about resupply and so on. Did you consider that at the time? Did you consider coming straight away, or have you been planning for this for so long you thought, well, I'm just going to stay on?
Well, I have a number of rules. My number one rule is that I want to keep myself safe and the people around me safe.
Sure.
And so when they came out with that, I debated starting the trail.
Uh-huh.
But I've been planning this for 10 years. I quit a job I've had for 16 years that I was in a really good position for.
Uh-huh.
This was a major life change based around this. And it was something my family gave me the blessing. And because of the age of my mom and the age of my daughter, it was like I had this year window where I think I could make this work.
Right.
And so
sorry, Jason, how old are you?
I'm 47.
Okay. Right. Sorry, carry on. Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought about it, and what I decided to do was make the trip down here, start hiking, and if I felt like I couldn't do it in a safe way, get off.
Right.
Or if I felt like I couldn't protect people around me or I would endanger people, don't do it. And I've got a safety network. If I have to hole up somewhere for a couple of weeks, I can. But what I've seen has been, I'm seeing minimal impact here. I'm not running into many people.
Right.
The only times I'm seeing people have been weekends, like on Blood Mountain. I saw 20 college kids from different colleges that were all in a big group sharing beers at the top of the mountain.
Well, they're all invulnerable, aren't they? So we know how that works.
Yeah, but I mean, that's what I'm seeing is the local activities. Some of them I'm just avoiding. And then when I'm in Helen right now.
Right.
The place is empty. And I'm following the local regulations. No more than 10 people in a restaurant.
Where are you actually staying then?
Oh, I'm at a Riverbend.
So, but you're actually staying in a hostel or a hotel or whatever, or motel, whatever it is.
Hotel.
And that
I'm avoiding hostels.
Right, and that is open to visitors, obviously, because you're there. You haven't just broken in. So, what's their approach towards it then?
Well, I mean, when I came in, they were wiping everything down with Clorox bleach in the actual hotel.
Right.
The clerk took our credit cards with gloves.
Right.
And I mean, it looks like every town is enacting their own precautions on how they're handling this.
But your issue is going to be, to a degree, and good for you for doing it that way, but your issue is going to be, to a degree, getting resupply, isn't it? Or are you getting it from post office drops? I mean, how's that working out for you?
Well, Mountain Crossing is where I got my first resupply,
Sure.
And the place was just absolutely, it was in good shape.
Right.
I think they order in bulk before the season starts.
And that was probably this weekend, wasn't it? Because I think you messaged me on Sunday.
Weekend.
Yeah. Sorry, the weekend just gone, rather. Yeah. So it's been another 3 days. You've now come in. What's resupply looking like now then?
I didn't even look, because what I've been doing, I've been packing for 7 days to minimize my time off trail.
Sure.
So I'm carrying an extra battery. I'm carrying extra food. Anything I can do to minimize the impact.
But you are literally socially distancing yourself from everybody. I mean, are you camping at shelters or around shelters?
I am camping. I think I've camped around shelters twice and maybe 3 times, and then I've stealthed or at like Lance Creek campground campsites. I've stayed at those types of places before, and there's about 3 of us that are moving in a. I don't know if it's going to last as a tramily, but we've been together now for 7-8 days. So we've said we're hanging out together, and those are the people that I'm having closer contact with. But even then, we're not sharing food. We're not doing any of those types of things.
So that, to be honest with you, I'm going to say something this week on the show which supports what the ATC are saying. But your situation is one I've often thought of, that people have wanted this for years and years and years, and suddenly, to have it taken away from you or potentially taken away from you will be horrendous. Are you actually enjoying the experience? Because a lot of this is the people you meet on the trail, and you're not getting a lot of that, are you?
We're not getting as much. No, we're getting some, but not as much. And I think I told you earlier that, I've got a couple of rules that I have for doing this hike. And one is making sure I can be safe and the people around me can be safe.
Absolutely.
The other one is to make sure I'm having fun.
Right.
And so, right now, I couldn't get a hotel in Hiawassee. It's so full right now.
Sure.
And there's people out here. There's resupply in parts of Georgia, from what I understand. I hear that that's going to change a lot in North Carolina.
Right.
And if I get to the point that I can't go into hot springs and have dinner, or I'm going to socially distance myself for a period here, but when I want to change that, if I can't get to something I want to do, then I don't think it's going to be the AT experience I want.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
That's when I'll come off and I'll take a break. What's
interesting to me, I don't know whether you saw it recently, Odie, who does the Hiker Yearbook, put on a kind of an angry, he would admit it was a rant, and he got very upset about it, about, how do hikers get off the trail now? Nobody will pick them up. And I know that perhaps some of them shouldn't be there. Is there a situation you can imagine where you're going to be stuck and not be able to get off? Because if you were to injure yourself and you needed to be collected from the trail, then you would be endangering other people. No question.
Yeah. I have had a lot of contact with some of the shuttle drivers down here, and some of the people who do that as their business.
Sure.
And, I've only had to take one ride so far, but it's been very supportive of us, and they're taking precautions too, in wiping down their cars and airing them out and doing other things. So, I do think that through at least Georgia, I'm in good shape.
Okay.
And I could get off if I needed to.
Right. You sound like you have contingency. You have enough money to get out if you absolutely need to, but some probably don't. But then perhaps they shouldn't have gone in there in the first place.
Right. I've got friends in North Carolina. I've got friends in Tennessee, all of whom have offered to come out and drop off food or give me a ride or other things. So. Well, I'm honestly avoiding Facebook right now because the hate is so strong in there.
Yes, please do. Don't look. Trust me, you could do. In fact, that might be a new rule in life. Just don't look at Facebook. It sucks. It totally sucks.
Yeah.
But look, I wish you well. I wish you'd get off the trail, but I understand why you're staying there. And I'm only saying it because the ATC I don't think they do this blithely. I think they've decided this is probably the best for the trail and the associated towns. They may be wrong. It may be an abundance of caution, but you sound at least that you're trying your hardest to do the right things as much as you can while still staying on the trail. I know many people will applaud you for staying out there. So what I'd ask you, Jason, if you could just stay in touch, you've got the text, you can contact me, and let me know what's happening and what you decide to do in the coming weeks. Is that okay?
That would be fine, yeah.
Okay, mate. Well, look, stay safe.
The one other thing, I don't know if you want to bleep out my name or anything. I just it's kind of crazy what I'm seeing online with
Don't
it's
look.
Actually scary.
Don't look.
I'm shocked at the hate that I'm seeing out there on this, and I understand it. I just think there are people who are doing it the right way.
Sure.
ATC said, please don't get off the trail, but if you do, here's the guidelines to follow.
Yeah.
And some of us are following those guidelines.
Right.
So,
okay. Well, look,
I get it.
If you want me to, I will bleep your name. In fact, you know what? I probably should, because I'm going to get a load of crap for this as well. So, but I will bleep your name, which is a sad state of affairs if you even just think about that, isn't it? But you're absolutely right. But just stay in touch with me. I'm going to call you. What should I call you? I'll call you. No, I was thought,
Here,
no.
Scribble.
Scribble.
That's one of my failed trail names.
All right, Scribble. We're going for Scribble. Okay, man. All right. Well, look, lovely to talk to you, and just stay safe out there. And if you feel, well, you understand. You know. So
I will come off in a minute if I think I can't do this safely. I mean, I will, but I really do feel that this is social distancing at its biggest right now.
Yes,
and when I come into a town, I'm acting like any town goer and walking into a grocery store, buying food and leaving. So,
sure. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know what I'd do different.
All right. Well, look, stay safe. Okay. And hopefully we'll catch up again soon. All right.
Okay. I'll talk to you.
Happy trails. Bye.
All right. Bye.
I think Jason just articulated the importance of nuance in the understanding of any of this that's going on. And I mentioned that I'd bleep out his name, but after reflection and another conversation with him, we decided to keep it in. You're going to hear in a moment what I think about that. As we all know, all the main trail associations have requested that hikers leave their trails and abandon or at least postpone their through and sectional hikes for this year. Last week, I was still undecided in my own mind as to how I would proceed if I'd been hiking or planning to hike this year. Now I know what I'd do. And I think that being in the open air on a trail is about as socially distant as you can get. You can avoid people and you can keep yourself and others safe by pretty much hiking alone and staying largely away from shelters. But it is when you go into town to either resupply or pick up a mail drop that you're not only endangering yourself, but more importantly, you're endangering others. I think that Jason really seemed to have it all worked out other than that point. As he said though, if he felt that he was endangering others, he'd get off the trail. With specific regard to the Appalachian Trail, most of us trust the ATC to be good stewards of the trail, and I'm sure that their letter of advice to hikers wasn't easy for them, but if they're good stewards, then we need to heed their advice. The worst thing is everybody thinks that they're right. I have no idea if I'm right, but I do know what I think. As you heard, Jason was a little wary of being named in our conversation. How on earth did that happen? How has Facebook become such a platform of hate and online abuse, especially amongst hikers? As you heard, I mentioned Odie, a man whose everyday first thought is, how can I help hikers? He has been eviscerated online this week for his video asking for help in rescuing certain hikers on the trail. I really felt for him. I think it was yesterday, actually. Yes, many people have gone out there without an exit plan, yet that is no reason to slag them off from the comfort of your sofa. Get over yourselves. Either help or scroll past the post. You're not the solution to the problem. You are part of the problem. As I said earlier, I'd happily give any of you time to come on the show and share a different point of view. Let me also say that I've offered a spot on the show to the ATC for the past 2 weeks, but they have yet to give me somebody to come on and talk. That offer is always open to them. Thanks as always for your support of my efforts on this and my other podcasts. If you like what we're doing and would like to help keep us on the air, please consider a donation. You can find a donate button on the podcast page of mightyblueontheat.com. Or as quite a few have done, you can even mail me a check made out to Mighty Blue Publishing to 8220 Lakewood Ranch Boulevard, apartment 406, Lakewood Ranch, Florida 34202. Thanks so much. Finally today, Grandma Gatewood continues to astonish the people she meets as she fights her way up the trail in the post-war America of 1955. I'll see you next week. Chapter 5. How'd you get in here? June the 9th to the 22nd, 1955. She couldn't keep a secret forever. She had hiked through Jefferson National Forest, then through a long stretch where the trail was torn up from manganese mining. Then, nearing Gross Close, Virginia, she found a section flush with peach trees and apple trees, and Etta fell, sweet juice on her lips. She had been turned away again at a snooty motel, and had seen a large black and yellow butterfly near Gold Bond, Virginia, and had found a big white goose feather at the very top of Sinking Creek Mountain. She had stayed the night with Mr. and Mrs. Ed Pugh, and Mr. and Mrs. Hashburton, and Mr. Lou Oliver, and Mr. and Mrs. Taylor of Pine Ridge, and Dr. and Mrs. Harry Simones, who enjoyed her stories about the trail so much that they kept her up past bedtime. So it was that on the afternoon of June the 20th, a Sunday, Emma met a man at a gas station and let slip what she was doing, where she was going. The next day, as she approached Black Horse Gap, she sat down a few yards away from the road on the edge of the forest to eat a snack. A car stopped in front of her and the driver pulled onto the shoulder. Two men climbed out, well-dressed, and walked toward her. The first introduced himself as Preston Leach, a photographer from Roanoke, Virginia, and the second said he was Frank E. Callahan. They were both trail club members who had heard about her journey and spent the afternoon trying to track her down. They were overjoyed to finally find her. They told her they wanted to tell her story, that what she was doing was simply amazing. The exposure would be great for the trail and people around there would love it. She wasn't sure. She still hadn't sent word home to her family. Besides, someone might read about her and get the idea to harm her or take advantage of an old lady. She told them no, that she wouldn't cooperate, but they didn't let up. They convinced her to stay the night at Callahan's cabin near the trail. They took her pack and loaded it into the car as insurance, and she set off to hike the final 10 miles over the mountains to Bear Wallow Gap, where they picked her up and drove her to the cabin. The game warden, J.W. Luck, joined them for dinner, which Callahan spooned from tin cans onto plates. It was 10 p.m. on the 48th day of her journey when she finally gave in. Leach fetched his camera. Emma sat up straight, tucked her right hand into her left, and smiled through false teeth. That night she jotted in her diary, "I finally was found by the newspaper," she wrote. The next morning a headline ran in the Roanoke Times. "Ohio woman, 67, hiking 2,050 miles on Appy Trail." The prospect of a 2,050-mile hike over mountain trails would cause many a hardy soul to cringe. A 67-year-old great-grandmother from Gallipolis, Ohio, enjoys it. Mrs. Emma Gatewood, who was in Botetourt County yesterday, is hiking the Appalachian Trail from Georgia to Maine. She did 20 miles from Cloverdale to Bear Wallow Gap yesterday in tennis shoes. Frank Callahan and Preston Leach of the local Appalachian Trail Club met the energetic lady at Black Horse Gap yesterday afternoon after Blue Ridge Parkway Rangers had reported her whereabouts. The widowed mother of 11 children, Mrs. Gatewood spent the winter in California, where she decided to travel the 2,050-mile trail, which follows mountain ranges up the eastern seaboard. She flew to Atlanta, Georgia, and set foot on the trail at Mount Oglethorpe, Georgia, May the 3rd. End of the trek will be the northern terminus at Mount Katahdin, Maine. Modestly reluctant to discuss her plans, Mrs. Gatewood travels light, said Callahan and Leach. All her belongings are carried in a sack. She refuses all transportation offers along the trail, but she will accept rides to nearby towns if she is taken back to the trail where she left it. The Ohio housewife has 26 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. Today, she plans to move from the Peaks of Otter area north to the James River. Uphill walking is easier than going down, she declared. The news was out. She didn't know it then, but the story, her story, would soon sweep the nation. She'd been mentioned in newspaper columns in Los Angeles to New York. Television shows would clamour for her time. As word spread like wood smoke, most towns she walked through, and even though she didn't, would send a reporter to intercept her and ask her questions about how she'd done it, how she was feeling, why she had begun. They'd call her Grandma Gatewood, and her name would be heard on the street corners and in the halls of the United States Congress. That morning, though, it was one measly article in one local newspaper. Still, she figured it was time to finally let her family know what she was doing. She picked up a few postcards from the nearest store and dropped them in the mail. When she first left, she had told her children she was going on a walk. Now they'd know what she meant. The trail was designed to have no end, a wild place on which to be comfortably lost for as long as one desired. In those early days, nobody fathomed walking the thing from beginning to end in one go. Section hikes, yes. Day hikes too. But losing yourself for 5 months, measuring your body against the earth, fingering the edge of mental and physical endurance wasn't the point. The trail was to be considered in sections, like a cow is divided into cuts of beef. Even if you sample every slice, to eat the entire beast in a single sitting was not the point. Before 1948, it wasn't even considered possible. How long would it take? What equipment would one need? What maps? Where and when should one start? These were the unknowns, but the human spirit has a way of answering questions. The first came in the form of a man trying to shake his demons. Earl Schaefer came home from World War II, confused and depressed, he wrote. He had lost a close friend in the war, someone with whom he had shared a desire to hike the AT. Like Emma Gatewood, he began considering the hike again after an article in a magazine, Outdoor Life, sparked his interest. The strong hiker found a plethora of obstacles: overgrowth, downed trees blocking the path, rough stretches where the trail wasn't marked. 11 years after its completion, whole sections of the trail seemed abandoned, forgotten. He sent a postcard to a meeting of the Appalachian Trail Conference from Holmes, New York. The flowers bloom, the songbirds sing, and though it's sun or rain, I walk the mountain tops with spring from Georgia north to Maine. The postcard was the first the ATT volunteers had ever heard from Schaefer, and when he finished at Mount Katahdin, some doubted the claim until he showed slides, his journal, and talked about the trail in detail. The Appalachian Trailway News ran a small blurb headlined, "Continuous Trip Over Trail," on the back page, but his hike brought much attention. He was interviewed by the newspaper and got the attention of National Geographic, which sent a reporter to hike the trail. The path was in close proximity to half a dozen of the country's biggest cities and nearly half the population of the United States, but before Schaefer, few even knew it existed. The attention helped. It took 3 years for someone to repeat Schaefer's achievement. A bearded 24-year-old Eagle Scout named Gene Espy came through in 1951, but he didn't know he was only the second person to thru-hike until he was shown a newspaper clipping that confirmed it. He assumed many had done it before. Chester Ziengielewski and Martin Papendick became the first to hike the north to south route from Maine to Georgia. In 1952, George Miller became the fifth thru-hiker at age 72. The first woman to hike the full trail in sections was Mary Kilpatrick, who finished the last part in 1939. Then there was an enigma. In 1952, hikers along the AT reported meeting a couple called Dick Lamb and Mildred. Many assumed the two were married and took to referring to Mildred as Mildred Lamb. In fact, she was Mildred Lisette Norman, an American pacifist, vegetarian and peace activist who had set out with a friend, Dick, to take the long journey. She eschewed folding money and carried very few supplies and would later become known as Peace Pilgrim, speaking at churches and universities through the American conflicts in Korea and Vietnam. She and Dick hiked north to the Susquehanna River, then took a bus to Maine and hiked from Mount Katahdin south. No hiker received all that much attention, though, because independent reports on their progress were either non-existent or sporadic. Many of them would later write books and communicate regularly with others who planned to thru-hike. But there wasn't exactly an organised system for accountability in those days. The ATC, which was the only outfit interested in paying close attention to trail accomplishments, tended to take people at their word, and that required relying on hikers to both report their trips and to report them accurately. Besides that, Americans weren't all that interested, or maybe they were distracted. World War II was over, the Korean War came to a close in 1953, but as soon as soldiers returned, the United States found itself locked in the Cold War, racing Soviet Russia toward the H-bomb. The news of H-bomb developments deeply impacted Americans, who found themselves discussing nuclear fallout and megatons and the genetic consequences of radioactivity at the dinner table. On March 1, 1954, the United States launched its latest H-bomb on the atoll of Bikini in the Pacific. The Navy had marked off 30,000 square miles as a danger zone that no ship was allowed to enter. One made it through, however. A crew of Japanese fishermen aboard a boat called the Lucky Dragon were pulling in their nets when the bomb exploded. One of the men gave a captivating, awful account. "We saw strange sparkles and flashes of fire as bright as the sun itself," the fisherman told the press. "The sky glowed fiery red and yellow. The glow went on for several minutes, and then the yellow seemed to fade away. It left a dull red, like a piece of iron cooling in the air. The blast came 5 minutes later. The sound of many thunders rolled into one. Next, we saw a pyramid-shaped cloud rising, and the sky began to cloud over, most curiously. A few hours later, a fine ash began to fall on the crew of the Lucky Dragon, 80 miles from the test site, who continued pulling in nets until the hold was full. They returned to Japan 2 weeks later complaining of burns, nausea, and bleeding from the gums. By then, the radioactive catch, some 16,500 pounds of tuna, had been sold to markets across the country, causing mass panic and raising hostile anti-American sentiment among the Japanese. In September, the crew's radio operator died, becoming the first Japanese victim of a hydrogen bomb. The unprecedented destructiveness of the brand new H-bomb was finally on full display, and it horrified the world. If a hydrogen bomb could do that to fishermen 80 miles away, what could it do to Manhattan, or London, or Tokyo? Headlines in England cried, Call off that bomb. Winston Churchill foresaw a peace of mutual terror. Nikita S. Khrushchev, the first secretary of the Soviet Communist Party, said, "We outstripped the capitalist class and created the hydrogen bomb before them. They think they can intimidate us, but nothing can frighten us, because if they know what a bomb means, so do we." At every turn, the United States, with its new destructive technology, was on the cusp of conflict with worldwide implications. By 1955, the government was ramping up efforts to encourage Americans to prepare for fire from the sky. The Atomic Energy Commission built a $1 million village called Survival City, USA, in the Nevada desert and stocked it with the furniture and appliances and mannequins to represent a typical American home. Then, on national television, the village was bombed. The furniture was splintered and the dummies were burned, but the dogs and mice inside deep concrete bomb shelters were spared, prompting an official with the Federal Civil Defense Administration to say the only shot at American survival was to dig in or get out. It wasn't just the communist bombs Americans were afraid of, it was communists themselves. The world had been divided after World War II, with Russia on one side and the United States on the other. And by 1955, the fear of communism in America was intense. The newspapers were filled with stories of spirings that stole state secrets and agents who had infiltrated government bureaus. The president had ordered chiefs of government bureaus to fire employees whose loyalty was in reasonable doubt, and congressional committees were set up to determine the extent of communist influence in the military and private industry. Libraries banned communist literature. Colleges demanded loyalty oaths from professors. Some 20 million Americans, more than a tenth of the 166 million US citizens, were subjected to federal security investigations. On communism's trail was Wisconsin Senator Joseph McCarthy, who had charged in 1950 that the United States State Department was a nest of communists and subversives. By 1954, the strong-necked, emotional politician was the most controversial figure in Washington, and a new word had made its debut: McCarthyism. To some, he was a fearless patriot, to others, a dangerous charlatan. To all observers, he was on the edge of astonishing political power, until he was censured by the US Senate. With the country buzzing about communism, the Supreme Court had set the course for another period of disruption and civil unrest when, in 1954, it ruled that separate education facilities are inherently unequal, ending racial segregation in public schools. The ruling touched off praise and anguish. Little by little, we moved toward a more perfect democracy, read an editorial in the New York Times. The court has blatantly ignored all law and precedent, said Georgia Governor Herman Talmadge. Georgia will not comply. The ruling had the largest impact on the states along the Appalachian Trail, especially in the South. School segregation was required in 17 states at the time of the ruling, and 6 of those, Georgia, Maryland, North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, and West Virginia, were home to the AT. 4 others, Alabama, Delaware, Kentucky, and South Carolina, were close to the trail. In White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, not far from the trail, 300 white students held a strike when about 25 black students tried to attend school in September 1954. That evening, hundreds of white adults met and voted to remove from class any black students who came to school the next day. None did, but the revolt began to spread to Milford, Delaware, and Baltimore, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. The other shocking story of the period was the rapid rise in juvenile crime. Headlines in New York screamed about the teenage thrill killers, a band of 4 boys from respectable Brooklyn homes who killed a man, beat another up and dumped him in the East River, horsewhipped 2 girls and set another man on fire. Across the country, killer kids made news. A 12-year-old basketball player from Detroit killed another after a game. A 17-year-old from Toledo raped and killed a girl. A 14-year-old babysitter in Des Moines killed an 8-year-old because he wouldn't stay in bed. The national crime rate for boys and girls under 18 had jumped 8% between 1953 and 1954. The spree was cause for great concern, and adults found social forces to blame. Even 2 years before anyone had heard of a boy named Elvis Presley, broken homes, television crime programs, comic books, tensions over the threat of war. One other motivator was blamed: inadequate recreation. She left Sunset Field near Roanoke, Virginia at 5:30 a.m. and had a difficult time following the trail. Much of it was overgrown and the blazes were hard to see. She was surprised when the trail led directly to a well-woven wire fence. Beyond it was a huge metal apparatus she didn't recognise. The trail marks stopped, and she couldn't decide where she had gone wrong. She walked along the fence away and came to a shorter barbed wire fence, so she climbed through, being careful not to snag her trousers. She came out on a slag road and followed it down to the highway, then found the trail again. She climbed through 2 more barbed wire fences, thinking it was odd, but pressing on nonetheless. Then she saw them. A dozen young men came marching toward her in a tight group, staring at her as if she were a ghost. "Where's the Appalachian Trail?" she called out. One of the men, she took him to be an officer, stepped out of the group and approached her. "You were supposed to take the parkway," he said. "Well, what are those marks for?" she asked. "That was the old trail," he said. She didn't know it, but the year before, the Air Defense Command had established a radar station called Bedford AFS atop Apple Orchard Mountain, one cog in a deployment of dozens of mobile radar stations around the perimeter of the country. It was a massive security effort 10 years into the Cold War. The squadron stationed atop the mountain was charged with spotting unidentified planes on the radar and guiding interceptor aircraft toward the intruders. The men watched the skies, but not so much the ground. Now they surrounded Mrs. Emma Gatewood of Gallia County, Ohio, and they stood in shock. "Thank you," she said. She turned and headed for the gate. The men were silent. As she approached, the guard came out of the shack, rubbing his eyes as if he'd been asleep. "How do you get in here?" he drawled in a hoarse voice. "I crawled through a few barbed wire fences," she said. "I'm liable to get arrested and shot, aren't I?" The guard grunted and unlocked the gate and let her out. When she was a safe distance away, she couldn't help but laugh. That night, she hunkered down on the front porch of an empty farmhouse. Cattle were grazing in the field nearby, but there was not a soul in sight. She pulled out a notebook. "I could hardly wait until I got away to burst into laughter at the ridiculous situation I'd gotten into," she wrote. "The looks on those boys' faces."